So now here's the scheme, right? We had a bankrupt company, as you saw over here, right? Um, in MNC during the financial crisis, the banking crisis, right? Now, what happens? Well, you need a guy who can restructure this one, okay? Now you have this international bank, by the way, who is in trouble because it has $100 million to receive, but there's no chance of getting $100 million back, okay? Now, in this situation, okay, in this situation, one guy gets in over here, equity investor or MNC, they say it, but not just one guy, but a group of parties, right? Group of companies come in over there, right? Uh, if it is Daewoo Motors over here, right? You have GM, essentially that's what happened. GM, General Motors, took it over, okay? Took it over, but before GM took it over, what must have happened? There must have been some guy who works as a middleman, okay? Works as a middleman. For example, Hudson Advisor or Lone Star or Archon Group of Goldman Sachs, right? All these kind of guys uh, get in over here and go to the bank and say what? Oh, on poor unfortunate bank, you got $1 million stuck over there. You cannot get it back to you, right? But we can help you, okay? $100 million you said, but $60 million I can give you, okay? So as long as I give you $60 million, say bye-bye to Daewoo Motors and whatever, okay? The company will not be yours from now on, okay? $60 million. Would you take it or not? Okay? So from the banker's perspective, it's still better than getting nothing, right? So let's say they take it, $60 million from this guy, the middleman, right? And then this with middleman, what would they do? Okay, where do they bring this $60 million, right? You need to get some money from somewhere. They go to the government, the central bank, okay? Okay, central bank or the treasury kind of guys, right? Because the central government is deeply concerned about those employees over here, right? We want some companies to keep on hiring these thousands and thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people who has to be working over there. Otherwise, the whole economy will be screwed. So these middlemen go to the central bank and say, you know what, I'm gonna help you over there. But for that purpose, I need $80 million. Okay, I need $80 million to do this business. I can connect you guys to General Motors so that they will take over this company, the Daewoo, poor unfortunate Daewoo, right? So give me $80 million, okay? I'm going to take over this loan relation and then, sometimes GM directly does that, right? I'm going to take over this company with this $80 million, which owes $1 million, but I cancel it, right? I just pay $60 million out of your payment of 80 millions, right? And then the difference of $20 million, what do I do? Well, I'm going to restructure the company, restructure and then reinvest into more promising business or keep on working, okay? $20 million, right? So that's how it works, right? Either GM directly works or there are some middlemen coming in, right? Special asset group investors or private equities get in there and then restructure it, okay? That's a basic conceptual map of doing it, okay? So sell $100 million of LDC debt, right? At $60 million of face value, 60% of it, and then the redeem LDC debt at 80% of face value in local currency, and then this as part of debt rescheduling agreement, among the bank lending syndicates and the debtor nations, creditor banks would sell their loans for US dollars at discounts, deep discount from face value to MNCs. So that's what we mean by selling, okay? Selling of the loan. Who sells it? The international bank sells it. To whom? The equity holders or your equity investors. We call it 출자 전환 or debt for equity swap. Your debt relation is now becoming ownership relations once you sell your loan at deep discount of 60% over here. Make sense? Right. Now this guy becomes the owner of this troubled company, right? But where did this guy bring this $60 million? Well, go to the central bank, right? And or the government, and then redeem LDC debt at 80% of face value in local currency. That's what's happening over here. Now, their local loans, creditor banks would sell their loans for US dollars at discount from face value to MNCs desiring to make equity investment in subsidiaries or local firms. What do you mean by subsidiaries? Well, if it is GM Daewoo or GM Korea kind of local subsidiary, MNC subsidiary, they create one, okay? Or local firms in LDCs, and then the LDC central bank would buy the bank debt from an MNC at a smaller discount, which means higher price than the MNC paid, right? So the middleman, gets the $20 million, right, as working between, and then but in a local currency terms they do it, and then MNC would use the local currency to make approved new investment in the LDC that was economically or socially beneficial to the emerging market country or the troubled country. Okay, so that's debt for equity swap. Well, who benefits from this kind of debt for equity swap? Well, the creditor bank. From the creditor bank's perspective, it's better to have partial recovery of loan than getting nothing at all, right? So they benefited. Market maker, right, the middleman, they're earning the bid-ask spread or the price gap of the discounted loan, okay? And LDCs, right? The LDC, what's that? The country, right? The country, or they have the policymaker, they benefit as well. Number one, they're able to pay off a hard currency loan to a foreign institution, okay, at a discount rate from the face value. Number two, the new productive investment is made in the countries, right? So they keep on hiring. The employment sustains somehow. Of course, there will be restructuring so that many people will be laid off, but it's better than 100% of the employees getting fired because of the bankruptcy, total bankruptcy. Okay. Now, the equity investors, right? Equity investors. Well, GM Daewoo kind of guys, right? GM. They purchase the local currency, LDC local currency needed to make the investment at a discount from a current exchange rate. So they also get the benefit out of this investment, right? And then this market maker and then the equity investors, they move together, right? They move together. Is there benefit only is one question, okay? There is a benefit, so that's why they keep on doing this kind of distressed asset management business in private equity. There are some unintended consequences as well, okay? If you look at it, right? Unintended consequence, what would that be? Well, there's a political risk, right? Political risk that is not highlighted in this textbook. There is a massive layoff of the workforce, and that will inevitably trigger some strikes of the labor unions, and it will hinder the process of restructuring in many ways. And then also what I'm trying to highlight over here is anti-imperialism sentiment, 반제국주의 정서 kind of things, right? So if, the labor union people and then the political party who is more left-wing, right? they are usually against this kind of um, purchase of foreign companies, purchased by the foreign companies, right? They would say, oh, those foreign capital is just colonializing our precious company. They are purchasing it at deep discount, which is unfair, so unfair. Uh, so it's only feeding those evil, greedy, capitalist pig. That kind of demonstration goes on, and then the social unrest unfolds. So that's some unwanted consequences, unintended consequences. A part of it, it has some reason to say like that, right? They have some reason to say like that because there were some significant evidences that during this imperial period, that was, you know, those multinationals of the empires were purchasing the emerging market companies as a way of imperial expansion before, right? So they have some reason to argue like that, okay? But some of this, right, are going to the extreme. Some of them are going to the extreme. So we have to be careful about that. Strong labor unions, they hinder those acquisitions, and then rationalization, more troublesome. Okay, and here comes one example: Sangyong Motor of Korea. Okay, Sangyong Motors. I mean, Hyundai, Daewoo were not the only two companies, producing cars. There was Samsung, the Samsung Motors, right? Samsung used to produce cars, right? And also Sangyong Motors there, right? Sangyong Motors was in trouble in after financial crisis in '97, and then they were eventually taken over by Indian company called Mahindra Motors. And then guess what happened ever since? Like those people the employees in the labor union of Sangyong Motors, they kept on doing the strikes, labor strikes, and then demonstration kept on going on, so much so that the Mahindra management have been feeling so much trouble managing this company. Okay, initially they may have the CEO of Mahindra may have underestimated the power of labor union in the South Korea, and then now they realize, oh my God, I'd rather not manage this company. And then there's a rumor going on that Mahindra may give up, this Sangyong's management anyway. And then unintended consequence, another one is there would be a lot of the conspiracy theory. Okay, conspiracy theory. There is a political risk associated with it. Okay, after a long while, the market value of the restructured company will increase. Of course, the distressed company, after bankruptcy, exposed, right? Exposed. After bankruptcy, it is in deep discount or value zero. So you purchase it in cheap price, right? And then there is a reason why it is cheap, because there was trouble, a lot of trouble and inefficiency going on. So you purchase it at deep discount, and then after restructuring, and the company becomes valuable, and then you sell it off at the higher price, right? There will be a capital gain. That's what the private equity is for. The private equity make money by doing this kind of restructuring business. But once it is sold at higher price, the general public draws attention to you again. Oh, you purchased it so at deep discount and selling it such a high price? Evil, greedy, capitalist pig, they would argue against you, right? And then, then some people will always cast doubt about whether the company was sold too cheaply at the financial crisis period. Okay? Moreover, somebody will always create conspiracy theory, which the general public always love to listen to, especially after such traumatic experience of financial crisis. A conspiracy theory. Here is one example that I want to highlight, which is related to a famous movie, okay, called 국가부도의 날, when the day of countries declaring bankruptcy. Okay, the country declared bankruptcy, which is associated, which is the story about 1997 financial crisis in South Korea. And then they were digging into this case of selling, okay, one of the major banks in Korea called 외환은행 or Korea Exchange Bank. Exchange Bank, right? It's related to foreign exchange, right? It was specifically designated by the government in 1960s. You guys focus on FX related international trade business, right? Trade finance, and this is your specialization. Foreign Exchange Bank, that's Korea Exchange Bank. 1960s and 70s it was created, well, managed okay, right? But in 1997 they were in trouble. Later on it was sold off with the financial crisis, right, at deep discount to Lone Star. And then later on the Lone Star, they restructured the company and sold it at higher price. But 10 years or 20 years later, the movie makers focused on this case, and then wasn't there some conspiracy going on? So much so that the private equity had some corrupt relations with the government somehow, and then they were buying it at the deeper discount than what it should have been buying. Wasn't it a conspiracy going on? And privately they were getting the extracting the benefit out of it, okay, cashing out the benefit. All kinds of conspiracy theory comes in, okay. As it turns out, a lot of the stories over there turned out to be not true, okay, but it became a blockbuster movie in Korea because it has its own well structured conspiracy story over there. And then this conspiracy is something people love to have, especially after experiencing traumatic accidents or traumatic crisis, like those 97 crisis or COVID-19 kind of crisis, right? They always, say there must have been some conspirator who is orchestrating behind this trouble, and then so that they suck up all this money, and then they work like they get fat, like richer and richer even more, right? But why do we have this kind of, why do we like to have this kind of conspiracy theory? It goes back to our human nature, right? We have our brain always asking for why. Once you have unexplainable shock or crisis, this kind of instinct of asking for why triggers, and then conspiracy always makes us happy in that sense. Oh, that's why we had certain crisis like that. Even though the why is false, we want to believe that story holds true, okay? And then there comes a confirmation bias, which means any evidence that supports this kind of conspiracy that I want to believe, I buy that kind of story over there, news or whatever. And I deny any kind of piece of news that says, no, that's false, right? And I turn blind eyes to that kind of news. Just like Donald Trump. Oh, this is a conspiracy coming from some like malicious guys or something. That's human nature. But this, whenever the banking crisis happens or economic crisis happens, there comes a restructurer or private equity that scraps this dead asset, and then, or inefficiently managed company, buy it cheaply and then restructure it and then make it more efficient and then sell it to the market at the right price, okay? That's private equity. And lastly, one thing I want to highlight is that among my friends, right, the guy who has been making tons of money, the most money until now, ever since he graduated from the university, right, is the one who worked in this restructuring part or the distressed asset group. Okay, my friend who majored in law, right? The law major, and then he started to work for one of those restructuring private equity, right, distressed asset group, right? Um, since 1999 or 8, he has been working there because there were a lot of bankrupt companies in the first place. But before 1998, we did not have that kind of business before because it was always a heyday, good business, a boom time, boom cycle, no crisis. But ever since 1998, he was, there were a lot of bankruptcies and there were a lot of demand for restructuring the troubled companies. Okay, what if the recession or the negative shock disappears quickly and then the boom times go on forever? Well, that is a negative risk for this restructuring business. Restructurers, they're counter-cyclical. Your bankruptcy time is your party time, our party time, okay? Kind of things. I mean, that's too much of a saying it, but it's counter-cyclical, right? You have a lot more business to do when everybody is in trouble. You have less of a business when everybody is going for a boom, right? But ever since, we've been having crisis every 10 years or less, right? So this time again, COVID-19 creates this kind of troubled companies. A lot of, I guess there are, those restructurers may be busy again. But this time, it may be different because there has to be some buyers at the end of the crisis, right? But COVID-19, let's say you are restructuring airline industry companies. Who will try to purchase these airline companies in 3 years down the road or 5 years down the road? A lot less. But still, this economic shock or bust of the business cycle is a good time for this kind of restructuring specialist. Okay, so think about going to this kind of business.